Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Caesar's Palace for 12 rounds of boxing. In the red corner, from Los Angeles, California, wearing the red trunks with the gold trim, weighing in at 125 pounds, the lightweight champion of the world, Danny Little Red Lopez. Well, Bill, our winners get a home theater receiver. That's right. Experience the full potential of high-definition video with this 72-channel digital home theater receiver from Yamaha. But wait, that's not all. They also get a 5.1-channel surround sound system from Mirage. With 5 palm-sized speakers and a compact subwoofer cube, the MX 5.1 brings you huge immersive sound with Mirage's omnipolar technology. All from the Spiegel catalog, Chicago, Illinois, 60609. And they're taking closer order as down the stretch they come. Mr. Hot Stuff has 3 lengths to make up with chocolate candy last. On the rail, take the points behind that gallant son with chocolate candy gaining on the outside. In the lead is Pioneer of the Nile being tackled by chocolate candy. They're neck and neck as they come to the wire. And Pioneer of the Nile holds off chocolate candy and wins the Santa Anita Derby. And now, on your feet, time to greet holder of 14 NBA titles, your home team, your Los Angeles Lakers. Number 3 at 6'8", 5th year out of UCLA, playing forward, Trevor Ariza. Starting at center, number 17 at 7 feet, 4th year out of St. Andrews High School, Andrew Bynum. And at guard, number 24, 6'6", 13th season out of Loyal Marion High School, Kobe Bryant.
The last concert I saw, I'm checking people off the list, was Elton John. I'd never seen him. Yeah. I saw him on his 3rd farewell tour. Which, by the way, stop falling for the fucking farewell tour. Yeah, they ain't going away.
Good morning. It's Saturday, Rules Saturday, April the 12th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have the no free lunch, communication, rules for retrogrades, parenting, motivation, meditation, and rules for patriots. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now, there's no free lunch. 250 Economic Truths by David Bahnsen.
Now, legal plunder can be committed in an infinite number of ways. Thus, we have an infinite number of plans for organizing it. Tariffs, protection, benefits, subsidies, encouragements, progressive taxation, public schools, guaranteed jobs, guaranteed profits, minimum wages, a right to relief, a right to the tools of labor, free credit, and so on and so on. Friedrich Bastiat. All tools available to the crony capitalist and her accomplice, the politician, have one thing in common: the thumb of government on the scale of markets. That some tools are more subtle than others does not change the fact that such interventions are corrupt when they seek to show favoritism to one economic actor over another. Legal plunder indeed.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, effective interpersonal communication. Method 7. Criticize/question. Other variants, the I don't believe you method. This strategy is the backbone and pioneer of moving towards an aggressive approach from a defensive approach in a debate. Aggressive here doesn't mean violent or disrespectful. It simply means asking more questions than answering them. In this method, you question everything your opponent says. Even if what your opponent says is the obvious truth, you should question it, because what appears to be the truth at first might not actually be the truth at all. During the investigation of a murder that took place in a hotel, the occupant next door to the room where the murder was committed was interrogated by the police. The police had found evidence of his presence in the room. This is how he replied when the police asked him to give a statement regarding his whereabouts at the time of the crime. At 3 o'clock, my sleep was disturbed by some noise. I felt like going to the toilet, so I got out of my bed and walked to the toilet, which is at the end of the landing. When I returned, I noticed the door of the room beside my room, that is the room where the murder took place, to be ajar. I walked inside and saw a person murdered on the bed. It gave me such a fright that I immediately returned to my room, locked the door, and went back to bed. How many things do you think are suspicious in this statement? And how many questions do you think can be derived from the statement? Think for some time before moving ahead. I would recommend that you write down all the questions that come to mind. These are the questions that should occur to the mind of a person listening critically with full attention. Question 1. How did you know it was 3 o'clock? Question 2. What kind of noise did you hear? Question 3. What time did you sleep at night? Question 4. How long did it take you in the toilet? Question 5. Are you sure the door was not open before you went to the toilet? Question 6. Why did you walk into somebody else's place? Question 7. Tell me about what else you saw in the room. Question 8. How did you realize the person was murdered and not asleep? Question 9. How did you realize the person was murdered and not injured? Question 10. Why didn't you raise the alarm that a person had been murdered? These are the theme questions to give us an idea of the basic plot. It's not necessary, or in some cases even wise, to use the exact same question. For question 1, for example, the suspect could have had the completely plausible response, I had a mobile phone to check the time, or I had a watch with luminous dials. However, if you don't ask the question outright, what you've got to do as the police is ask for his belongings and check whether he had any device suitable to check the time in the dark, and then ask him the question afterward. Similarly, question 3 is irrelevant, and this question can be easily verified by other people. However, the purpose is that the police ascertain from other people whether the guy sleeps at night at all, as he claims, or is he actually a night person who sleeps during the day. As I said in the beginning, in the criticize question method, you'll try to find fault in everything your opponent says. You don't let even the slimmest chance of a lie go undetected. Even if your opponent says something which sounds ordinary or common sense, you have to cast doubt on it. Depending on the suspect's answers, new questions will arise. Also, depending on his answers, the next in-line questions may either change or completely get omitted. By using this technique, you take the debate into your hands and don't let your opponent control the flow of the debate. In other words, rather than letting your opponent question and discuss your weaknesses, you question and discuss your opponent's weaknesses. In any lengthy debate, this technique is a must. It's okay to keep answering an opponent's questions and criticisms if you're confident about yourself, but then you would just be defending yourself. That way you would be taking a risk and giving your opponent a lot of chances to ask a question that you're unable to answer. And I'm going to insert something right here and say that what he's missing is the issue of good faith, bad faith. If the person is acting in good faith, the person you're talking to, then yes, it's okay to answer their questions. But if you know they're acting in bad faith, you don't answer their questions. You try to get them to answer your questions. Let's see. Your opponent keeps asking you questions like, why did you do this? Why did you do that? And why did you believe in this? Why did you believe in that? And you just keep having to block or dodge his blows. Imagine a debate going on between the priests of two religions. One priest keeps throwing queries and accusations at the other's faith, and the other keeps giving satisfactory answers. In such a case, it wouldn't be wise of the second priest to just sit and keep answering. After answering 1, 2, or 3 questions, he should stop defending and start attacking. He should say, okay, brother, you've asked me enough questions. Now, let me ask you some. That way he can force his opponent and the audience, if there is one, to think in his shoes. And again, I'll intercede here and say that the issue really is one of identification. Your opponents, the people who are acting in bad faith, like to disguise themselves and let you believe that they're on your side. And then that way you're going to come out and reveal things about yourself you might not otherwise do, and they can take advantage of that information and use it as a weapon against you. But if you go ahead and insist that they reveal themselves to you, they identify themselves to who they are, let's say, are you a Trump supporter? Are you a Republican? Are you a Democrat, a liberal, conservative, etc.? Once they've identified themselves, now you can be acting in good faith. Then you can go ahead and answer their questions. Back to the book. Otherwise, no matter how many good and detailed answers he gives, he will fail to force his point through and prove his opponent wrong. At best, the audience will think there's a draw. Imagine all the hard work at answering those difficult, biased questions, and everybody still thinks that the debate has ended in a tie. And I'll interject something here as well. For conservatives versus liberals, the tie always goes to the conservative. Always. Because the liberal is the one that's trying to create a movement. Conservatives are not. There is no such thing. You'll hear it and maybe have heard it from people, even William F. Buckley Jr., the term movement conservatism. It doesn't exist. We're not movement oriented. We mind our own business, take things as they come. It's the left that has to create and sustain a movement. So if you can just simply stymie them, talk them to a standstill or question them to a standstill, you win. Back to the book. So the criticism approach is fundamental to most debates, especially lengthy ones. If you keep thinking of defending yourself, it shows you've got an inferiority complex. It shows you're scared, that you subconsciously think that no matter what you do or say, the other person would think of you as the bad guy. You have to broaden your mind. Even during a debate, you need to think about all the possible situations, even if you lose and fail to convince the other person. The criticized question method allows us to think outside the box. Many times someone scolds us for doing something which he himself also does. Like when we were late to a meeting once and our coworker, who's a habitual latecomer, makes us feel bad about it. This is not to say we shouldn't feel guilty about our mistakes. To summarize, in order to implement the criticized question method, you need to be critical of your opponent in a debate. You shouldn't believe everything he says. Rather, you should doubt everything he says and keep asking questions. How, why, where, when, what do you mean? Who said that, and especially why? Questioning things allows you clarity of mind. Otherwise, if you accept everything without question, you'll soon start to feel that people trick you too often and keep selling you empty boxes while they're claiming they're filled with jewelry. And what I got to say about that is that again, first of all, you got to find out whether or not they're acting in good faith. And you ask the questions because very often The people that are not acting in good faith just simply make arbitrary claims. Even people that are acting in good faith will make arbitrary claims, because arbitrary claims are a social lubricant. If we had to prove everything that we said, every time we open our mouth, we have to have evidence and proof, we wouldn't be able to have a conversation with anybody. So we use arbitrary claims, which basically means you're asking somebody to take your word for it. You just have to remember that you don't have to. That taking somebody's word for it depends on whether or not you trust them. If I trust this person, if they're acting in good faith, I'm more likely to take their word for it. If they are acting in bad faith, then I'm less likely to take their word for it. That's when the questions come in. Who, what, where, when, why, and how. And that was Effective Interpersonal Communications by George Hader. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, rules for retrogrades.
Rule 28. For radicals, the issue is never the real issue. Don't be fooled. Whatever it happens to be, radicals' talking point du jour is invariably a mere ruse aimed at achieving a darker, more nefarious, more strategic, long-term goal. Mod cons often make the mistake of engaging radicals on the substance of their talking points, as if radicals are advocating for or against a given policy in good faith. But this is folly. The talking points of radicals, their issues of the day, are always mere Trojan horses for accomplishing a deeper agenda. When radicals take up the mantle of a given issue, it's as an avenue for pursuing something far more profound. So, you'll never be able to get a hardened radical to abandon his endorsement of, let's say, expansive firearms restrictions, even if you offer irrefutable proof that crime rates are lower and murders are fewer in areas where legal gun carriage proliferates. The issue for the radical was never truly an intolerable level of violent crimes. That was all a decoy, a convenient setting for emotive lip service aimed at providing the justification for a reimagined society. Mod cons would be well served to understand, for example, that the debate over gun control isn't about reducing deaths. It's about making people more dependent on government by depriving them of self-sufficiency. Likewise, the debate over abortion isn't about a woman's right to choose. It's about freeing women from the home by enabling women's careerism. The debate over unfettered immigration isn't about relieving the world's poor, tired, huddled masses. It's about ushering in globalism and undermining the sovereignty of the nation-state. The debate over raising taxes isn't really about balancing the budget. It's about income redistribution. The debate over climate change isn't really about protecting the environment. It's about handicapping the economies of first world nations so that third world nations can achieve parity of wealth. The debate over gay marriage isn't about equality of rights. It's about debasing and undermining matrimony and the family, which are viewed as patriarchal and oppressive. The debate about trans rights isn't about respecting human dignity. It's about undermining the moral order and crushing sexual taboos. The true believers, those wonks who become embroiled on the radical side of the foregoing fights, fail to comprehend that they are mere pawns in a larger game that is being played by cleverer people. If you don't know whether or not you're a pawn, then you're a pawn. On a meta level, what radicals are really pursuing is a humanist utopia, a world without borders, class distinction, sex distinction, and wealth inequality, a world where each man is free to live out his unique artistic identity, doing as he pleases, unshackled from arbitrary constraints placed upon him by a domineering ruling class. It's a subjectivist, existentialist vision wherein each man can make of himself what he wills, serving not God, but his own whims, and thereby ostensibly the community. Till this ultimate stage of the radical vision is achieved, the state must be grown and empowered so that it can be used as a bludgeon to implement the unnatural policies that will ensure the attainment of the longed-for utopia. But out of fear of backlash, radicals have to scheme to bring about their new order in secret. They can't broadcast what they plan to do because it would prove fatally unpopular. So they have to implement their grand vision piecemeal, never tipping their hand till all becomes clear in one phonic denouement. Be reminded that the radical vision is an inherently godless vision, one that must be heartily rebuffed by the retrograde. Efficient causes, creators, imbue their creations with final cause, with purpose. Since God is our creator, we cannot choose our own purposes in life. To decide man's purpose is God's unique privilege, and he has decreed, once and for all, that our purpose is to know, love, and serve him. Living life outside of these parameters leads only to misery and ruination. That said, we need to attack the radical vision in its unmasked form. There is no use debating an endless litany of decoy issues with radicals, except to temporarily stave off an attack. Rather, we need to attack the philosophical errors that are at the core of radicals' doctrine. Becoming bogged down in the morass of policy minutiae with radicals is a fool's errand, since their mania for the utopian state moves them to ignore the illogic of the many planks of their platform, just as the tail wags the dog.
And that was Rule 28 of Rules for Retrogrades, 40 Tactics to Defeat the Radical Left by Timothy J. and David R. Gordon. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now I'm going to be reading from the book The Sovereign Child. And we're in the chapter about letting kids eat whatever they want. And this section of the chapter is called Food Culture in a House with No Rules. My basic approach to food with my kids is to treat them like I would house guests who didn't choose to visit. I prepare for them the food that my wife and I eat, but also ask if there are different foods that they prefer. If so, I'm sure to stock the house with those foods. After all, when vegetarians visit, we make vegetarian food. On the other hand, I wouldn't consider myself a slave to whatever they demand. I make an effort to prepare meals that they like, including wasting a bit of food and remaking meals that are rejected, but only to a point. Eventually, I'd throw in the towel and tell a picky eater that they're on their own, although I'd make sure to keep a store of foods that they tend to prefer. All of the kid food in our house is stored at knee height in open cabinets and in the easy-to-open freezer so the kid can always see what's available. This includes cookies and ice cream, as well as more wholesome foods like noodles and fruit. There's no secret location for candy and no embargo on juice. If my kids want to skip a meal, I don't lecture them about eating now so they don't get hungry later. Instead, if we are taking a trip, we bring plenty of snacks in case they get hungry. I'll often put breakfast in front of my kids and ask them to eat it in preparation for a trip. But if they refuse, I take care not to give the impression that I'm displeased. We don't make our kids come to the table for family dinner. That's not to say we don't care about shared meals. We certainly value this bonding experience. In fact, we value it so much that we don't want our kids to develop resentment about it. We want them to participate in shared meals for the same reasons we want to do it, and those take time for a small child to discover. We encourage them to join us to try to make things like setting the table and preparing the food fun and special, and we let them bring their tablets or toys to the table. My two daughters almost always join in, but my son rarely does. He doesn't like a fuss and prefers to eat at his own kid table at a time of his choosing. I'm confident that he enjoys our company and will eventually join in the family meal, and I'd much rather wait until he comes to this conclusion on his own. One of the best consequences of giving kids free rein with food is it eliminates a source of conflict among siblings. Our kids don't guard their treats from each other, nor do they taunt or tease each other when one of them has a treat that the other doesn't. If they want more, they can always have more. There's never a complaint that something isn't fair because no one has limitations. Instead, my kids take joy in each other's delights and preferences. Anytime I'm in the store with just my oldest, she loves to pick out the snacks that her brother and sister like. All that said, I think there's something else going on here. Even if parents weren't concerned about health or diet or getting enough energy, many would still seek to control food. There's a sense among parents that kids should have limits set on things they want because they want it, regardless of what that thing is. I call this sense that is wrong for a child to satisfy their wants the greedy child fallacy. This idea is not usually spelled out so explicitly by parents, but has evolved over the centuries and manifests so frequently that we take it for granted. The idea that children are inherently and destructively greedy is used to justify all manner of control. Why can we not get this particular thing that we want? Why must this particular shortcoming be accepted? Is it bad to want the thing in question? If so, why? Etc. Conclusion. Fortunately, everything seems to be going well in our household. Our kids are all within normal weight. Our daughters have palates at least as broad as that of a typical kid, and they generally enjoy all the foods they eat. Since their palates are authentic, they are progressively refining their tastes rather than forming preferences based on their parents' expectations. I've not detected anything like a sugar high after they eat sweets, and I'm convinced this is one of the many tropes that have evolved to exert control. They do seem to get grumpy when they're hungry, but so do kids who are restricted by conventional food rules. And again, since they manage their eating without our input, they can make the connection between mood and food themselves. When someone is angry and irritable, they don't want to hear about how they should eat better or sleep more, and when they're pressured to fix the problem by eating or sleeping, this can trigger defensiveness that obscures rather than reveals the connection. As with adults, so with kids. And that was chapter 1, eating what they want. And again, what they're basically advising parents to do is allow their kids to treat the household as though the parents are their servants, that the household is a giant restaurant. They come home, they place their order, and the parents then are their servants and are there to serve and satisfy their every need and whim and etc. And it's just not so. It's a family. As we'd been told when we were growing up, this isn't a hotel. I heard that many times. This isn't a hotel. Okay? And if we'd leave our clothes lying around or whatever, we were told again, we're not your maids. You need to pick up after yourself. And the same thing goes with dietary restrictions. It's mainly because we're a family and the parents are not your servants. Also, what he's talking about is treating children like adults, but they're not adults. Okay, if you want to keep everything stocked for your kids' favorite foods after they turn 18, they go away to college, they come back home for a visit, and you have all their favorite foods in there, and fine. Maybe even when they're in their teens, 16, 17, 18 years old, and you want to treat them more like an adult, that's fine. But when they're young, you don't do that. They deserve better. You shouldn't ask your children to learn by hitting every pothole in the road. It's wrong. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a little bit of motivation.
You can write everything down if you want to. Be brave enough to write every one of your goals down. But I'm going to tell you something. Life's going to hit you in your mouth, and you got to do me a huge favor. Your why has to be greater than that knocked out. Are you willing to get your teeth kicked out for your dream? That's why many are called, but few are chosen. Because everybody won't get the beat down. Everybody's not willing to face rejection. Everybody will not talk to 4 people and visualize 5,000. Everybody won't take the controversy. Everybody won't take the heat. Everybody won't hold themselves to a higher standard. As soon as you write your dream down, somebody about to bust you in your mouth. Whatever it is that thing you say you want to do, they come and ask you. The reason why you do what you do is more critical than what you do. Because if your reasoning is weak, you're not going to get it done. Why? Because life is going to beat you upside your head. Life will strip you to the core. Once your balls start tripping, you about to start crying. Once life hits you with a punch or two, you ready to quit. Phenomenally skilled is cute. But it is a phenomenal will that says every time I get knocked down, I will get back up and I will succeed. I will not surrender. But if you're weak, you will be broke. And I'm not here because I'm the best. I'm here because they tried to break me and they couldn't. Think about your community. Think about your kids. Think about the obstacles and the problems, the so-called problems in your community. Think about them. Osborne said, in life, you will always be faced with a series of God-ordained opportunities brilliantly disguised as problems and challenges. We can't judge according to appearances. We must look at the poverty and the despair and the pain and the stress. And in the midst of that, we see prosperity. We see health. We see peace. We see possibility. I'm telling you to dream your dream because I want you to feel it. I want you to taste it. I want you, just like when the weather is changing, you can feel it. I want you to be able to feel when you're getting closer to it and closer to it. If you are still alive, there's still room for growth. There's still room for improvement. You can still get bigger. You can still get better. You can still be bolder. There's still room to grow and be better. Get out of your head and into your greatness. You can't stroll to your goals. You keep being casual, you will end up a casualty. Death is not the greatest tragedy of our time. The greatest tragedy is what dies inside of us while we're still alive. Not trusting your gift is sinful because by God, it was put in you. I don't know what you've been through, but trust your heart. It will defend you. You need to use your tongue to validate your gift and look yourself in the mirror and encourage yourself as to I'm still gifted. I've been through some pain, but I'm still gifted. I've buried some loved ones, but I'm still gifted. I've had some setbacks, but I'm still gifted. Despite the circumstance, you can win. Despite the giants, you can win. Despite the adversity, you can win. Despite the obstacles, you can win. Despite the situation, you can win. Despite how much money you got in your bank, you can win. You can pull it off. Why do you do what you do? Why is that important, Les? Because when the storms of life come, and they're going to come, when life pounds on you, and that's going to happen, when it catches you on the blind side and drop you to your knees, and that's going to happen, when people don't come through for you and don't keep their words and don't support you or actively work against you, and that's going to happen, when you want to give up, and that's going to happen, your reasons will be your bridge over troubled waters. You got to know why you're out here, because you're going to get your butt kicked. But you gotta know why you're there, because your reasons, when life drops you to your knees, your reasons will help you get back up. What are the reasons? Write down why you're here. Write down 5 compelling reasons of why you're gonna keep your commitment to change your life. Keep your commitment never to go back to the life that you once lived. Keep your commitment to creating wealth for yourself, to taking care of your children, to be more responsible. Keep your commitment to live a life of contribution, to keep your commitment to be a conqueror, and to act like it, and to have authority and dominion of everything in your life. What are those reasons? If life knocked you down, try and land on your back, because if you can look up, you can get up. Your reasons will help you to get back up again. What's that thing that's going to pump you up and get you over that hill? What's going to pump you up and get you over that mountain? What's going to pump you up and get you past that disease? What's going to pump you up and get you past bankruptcy? What's going to pump you up and get you past that crazy credit score you got? What's going to pump you up and get you to the other doggone side? I'm talking about hope. You got to be able to see it when it cannot be seen. You got to see it in your mind's eye. You have to see it happening. You have to see yourself writing the book before the book is finished. You got to see it. You have to see yourself graduating, even though the teachers are telling you that it's not going to happen. Even though you got the letter saying you're getting kicked out of school, that you're on academic probation, that you're dismissed. You have to believe in the unseen. Because if you can't believe in it, you will never manifest it. But when you believe in it, you demand the universe to assist you in what you're doing. And if you can see it before everybody else can see it, then it's going to eventually come to you.
And that was a little bit of motivation. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a little bit of meditation. And that was a little bit of meditation. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now a little interesting blurb from Eyewitness News.
The Orange County Health Care Agency is closing several of its clinics after cuts to federal funding.
These clinics deliver important health care services and will impact women and children across the region. Orange County reporter David Gonzalez has the details.
Dr. Kathy Cosentino walked out of the OC Healthcare Agency's 17th Street Clinic in Santa Ana for what may have been one of the last times on Wednesday. She just found out the children and family planning clinic she works at is shutting down.
I just sat at my desk and cried. They know our clinic. They trust us. They're getting good preventative care here. And it's a huge, huge loss for our community.
The impacts are real. Once we reduce our funds, we have no funds in order to provide the service.
Dr. Veronica Kelly says so far they've lost 5 grants totaling $13 million due to federal funding cuts.
These are for looking at disease, doing disease surveillance, figuring out what's causing the disease, and then treating the disease, as well as looking at the laboratory specimens of the disease.
Dr. Kelly says dental services at the 17th Street Clinic will also end, and they'll reduce the size of WIC clinics in Santa Ana and Buena Park.
We've been reduced about $750,000 in WIC funding.
OC Healthcare Agency plans to help impacted families transition to other community partners.
The good thing is we have a very robust Medi-Cal system. Our managed care partners, CalOptima and Kaiser, can provide that care, and our community clinics can provide the care to people who might be unfunded and or undocumented.
OC Healthcare Agency says dental services here at the 17th Street Clinic will stop on May 6th, and children and family health planning will end on June 30th. Reporting in Santa Ana, David Gonzalez, ABC 7 Eyewitness News.
So there you go. And the interesting thing about this, as soon as I heard them talking about this doctor, and I've heard these stories many, many, many times, this doctor who is leaving for what may be perhaps the last time, and I thought, you know what, they're not going to draw a conclusion on this story. It sounds like it's a story that's building to a conclusion, a crescendo, but it never draws a conclusion. You can hear that they never conclude anything. They don't say that this is good, it's bad. They just leave it there. They use tone of voice and the overall tone of the article, if you will, to manipulate the listener. They use the interview where they include a segment where she says, I just sat at my desk and cried. So that's supposed to be, again, it's supposed to tug at our heartstrings. They want us to draw a particular conclusion, but they won't tell us what it is. And the reason they won't do that is because, again, of the conclusion issue, which is that not the conclusion, but the explanation issue, which is that if you explain, you lose. Because if you explain, you sound desperate, and they don't want to do that. So instead, they're manipulative. They include only those things in this story that's going to drive their point, but they leave it unfinished at the end. And that is deliberate. It's designed to create this sense of suspense in the viewer. One of the things that would help and would defeat this kind of reporting would be nonprofit news. Nonprofit news now. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, what does the phrase, if you're explaining, you're losing, mean? This was said by Ronald Reagan, speaking of political campaigns. From the perspective of your audience, if you have to explain yourself, you come off looking desperate to convince. As a consequence, you lose the high ground. From a more philosophical perspective, if you have a clear conscience and strong conviction towards the positions you take, your values, truth, and direction, you don't need the opinions or consent of others. As a consequence, you don't need to explain yourself. However, if you yourself are not convinced of the validity and truth of your position, or you can't fully justify your choices, Then you continue to expel words, words, words in an attempt to create the illusion of certainty. Back in a minute. Thank you, and now, rules for patriots.
Chapter 8, Commandment number 7. Define your opponent before they define themselves, and define yourself before your opponent defines you. Say there's this girl you're really interested in, and you really want to meet her, but you're too nervous to go up and introduce yourself. So you ask your worst enemy to do it for you. I mean, he's attracted to her as well. He proceeds to tell her about this guy he knows that's interested in her, piquing her curiosity. Tell me about him, she says. Is he cute? Define cute, he replies. I wouldn't say he's hideous, but he's certainly nothing special. Granted, you're not exactly Ryan Reynolds or George Clooney, but you didn't have a problem getting a date in high school back in the day. Is he athletic or normal size, she asks. Translation, is he morbidly obese? Sure. Now that you're a little older, you're not as lean and mean as you used to be, but you're still in pretty decent shape for your age. Dude could stand to lose a few pounds, is how your enemy describes you to her. Now the girl is grasping for any initial reason to pursue this further. What does he do for a living? That's her final inquisitive attempt to give you a chance. You're just about finished with med school, which you put off for a few years to do missionary work in Africa. Currently, you volunteer to provide medical care at the homeless shelter in your spare time, and you're temporarily living at home with your mother, who is still lonely and struggling with grief after the unexpected death of your father last year. Nevertheless, your enemy tells the girl, well, he's unemployed and lives at home with his mom. By allowing your enemy to define you to the girl you're both interested in, you have been defined as unemployed and living at home with mom, overweight, and not exactly blessed with movie star good looks. Your enemy didn't technically lie in the way he described you to the girl, but he certainly cast you in the worst possible light. Since the girl assumes she's already getting the best possible description of who you are from the person you sent to indirectly represent you, she concludes you're really a fat loser without a job. Well, no wonder he didn't come talk to me himself, she says to her friends after your enemy departs. With her phone number for himself, of course. If you went online looking for love, would you put fat loser without a job on your eHarmony profile? No, you'd probably put decent looking guy finishing up med school who is currently caring for his grieving mother instead. By now, some of you reading this are wondering what the point here is, other than the shy guy who sent his enemy to talk to the girl he's interested in is a total ignoramus. Well, that's precisely the point. In the culture war, we are making the same mistake. We're bashful about expressing and advancing our principles, which allows our enemies to bash us to an available and undecided culture. Most Americans do not know what they really believe, let alone why they believe it. Think I'm wrong? Just look at the election results of the past decade and a half. In 2000, the American people gave George W. Bush the presidency despite losing the popular vote. In 2012, the American people gave the Republicans both houses of Congress to go along with the presidency for the first time since Herbert Hoover. In 2004, they re-elected George W. Bush president of the United States. Then in 2006, they made Nancy Pelosi the first female Speaker of the House in American history and gave the Democrats a 60-seat, filibuster-proof majority in the U.S. Senate. In 2008, they elected Barack Obama to the presidency and gave Democrats total control of Congress. In 2010, they fired over 700 Democrats and made Republican John Boehner Speaker of the House, sending a message to Obama he had gone too far left too fast. Then right after repudiating Obama in 2010, they turned right around and re-elected him in 2012, despite the fact he continued to govern just as bad as he had prior to the 2010 midterm defeat. Those are some dramatic swings in momentum in a relatively short amount of time. If I were analyzing the mood of the American electorate based strictly off these schizophrenic results, I'd have to conclude the American people want a quasi-socialist welfare state they don't want to have to pay for, a strong national defense they don't want to have to actually use, and a return to traditional morals they themselves don't want to be held accountable to. Ours is a nation up for grabs, where marriage wins 31 consecutive elections all over the country, but most people no longer view homosexual behavior itself as immoral and can't get enough of modern family. Most Americans describe themselves as Christians, but then sit idly by and do nothing, while every vestige of Christianity is snuffed out of our public institutions. Most Americans say they want less government, until it's their suckling spot on the welfare state teat being threatened. We've gone from red states and blue states to red counties and blue counties, and now to red suburbs and blue inner cities in the same counties. One local weather forecaster says today will be partly sunny, and the guy on the other channel says it will be mostly cloudy. We are every bit a house divided. About the only thing we can agree on is we're desperate for leadership, and desperation almost always leads to bad decisions. Just like the stereotypical single woman in her 30s who lowers her dating standards due to her proverbial ticking biological clock, there is a palpable sense in the country the clock is ticking on America, so something must be done. I believe that sense of desperation, more than anything, is why we've seen such a schizophrenic voting pattern in the 21st century. We're basically trying anything to see what works. It's the political equivalent to grasping at straws or casting lots. We're one step away from just determining public policy via Powerball. Aside from the hard left that wants to turn America into a Western European-style socialist democracy, most Americans are unsure of what they want. But after looking at what the leadership in both parties serves up, after we empower them, meet the new boss, same as the old boss, we know what it is we don't want. In 2009, a friend of mine gave me some internal polling done for the Inside the Beltway Republicans about the mood of the American electorate heading into the 2010 midterms. If I could sum up this report in one sentence, it would be this: the American people don't like the Democrats, and they don't trust the Republicans. I think the same largely remains true today. It used to be younger generations who had yet to face the real world were too idealistic, but now the exact opposite is true. The younger you go in America, the more cynical you get, as generations that have never been taught the traditional American view of law and government, let alone history, become increasingly nihilistic. Just look at the video games they play, where the car thief and the assassin are the heroes. Altruism and absolutes are considered archaic. For 50 years, Superman was America's comic book secular messiah. Nowadays, the concept of someone doing good just because it's objectively good, and not being conflicted about whether it's actually good or not, just doesn't resonate with this generation. So Batman, the damaged vigilante who tightropes the razor's edge between light and dark, he's the alpha supermale instead. Now maybe it's just me, but I actually see this as a tremendous opportunity for us. A theologian by the name of D.A. Carson observes that truth in a culture tends to work in a 3-generation cycle. What one generation believes, the next generation assumes, and the third generation rejects. Obviously, the truth that Carson is specifically referring to in his philosophical study is the gospel. But since the gospel played such a pivotal role in the making of America in the first place, it could be argued his analysis applies to our current cultural condition as well. The greatest generation was the last one to truly embrace the foundational framework of the American way, e.g. personal responsibility, rugged individualism, American exceptionalism, etc. The next generation, the baby boomers, immediately began to splinter. Some formed what David Horowitz describes as the New Left, thus sparking the so-called culture war. The majority of that generation, Republican and Democrat, just assumed the beliefs of their parents in the greatest generation. But it only takes one bad apple to ruin the whole bunch. With most of the baby boom generation on cruise control, the New Left takes over the leadership of the Democrat Party, and also takes control of most of the media, pop culture, and education infrastructure in the country. Now the third generation, adults my age and younger, have all but rejected what their grandparents believed to be true. While that means we're culturally holding on for dear life here in the short run, if we can hold on long enough and play our cards right in the long-term future, there is a potential for a major American Renaissance revival here. The emerging generation is poised to begin the 3-generation cycle all over again. The only question is what meta-theme or transcendent truths will they embrace and pass on from here? We've got a shot to restore the Republic, but we've only got one shot. In light of that, I've got some good news and some bad news. The good news is that emerging generation is all but a blank slate, believing in nothing. The bad news is we're not currently equipped to fill in the blanks for them. We're now the counterculture, and the left is now the man keeping them down. It's becoming passé to have sex with anything you want, short of a car battery, getting stoned every day that ends in Y, and knowing nothing. That used to be cool and considered some existential statement about refusing to be a cog in the machine, but now it's a cliche. Even raunchy comedy movies like Knocked Up have an underlying theme paying homage to some vestige of the Judeo-Christian moral ethic. If you want to challenge the status quo in this era, you get and keep a job, pay your own way, stay married to the same person from the opposite gender until one or both of you die, have a lot of kids, and go to church. In other words, the 1950s is now considered edgy. The more hopeless it becomes, the more conditions on the ground in this culture are ripe for revival. Human nature craves complacency. As someone that has lost almost 100 pounds, I can personally vouch for this. I could talk all I wanted about getting healthy, but only when I was sick and tired of being sick and tired did I truly commit to the change that was necessary. Otherwise, if we can kick the can down the road, we will. Along those lines, when faced with national fiscal insolvency, a generation's basic survival instinct takes over. This explains why Ron Paul, an almost octogenarian whose quirky stage presence makes Ross Perot look like Cary Grant, was one of the only Republicans in America successfully wooing young voters when he retired in 2012, despite the fact several of his domestic policy proposals are perhaps the most radically right-wing in the GOP. Those younger voters are looking at a bleak future and are rejecting the premise they have an obligation to accept the burden of the previous generation's inability or unwillingness to practice self-control or govern itself. On the other hand, elderly voters who belong to AARP no longer buy green bananas, let alone worry about what shape the country is in 20 years from now. They're voting based on maximizing their welfare state cash value now. However, we will not be able to reach this emerging generation and position this country for a long-term rebound without obeying the 7th of my 10 commandments of political warfare. Define your opponent before they define themselves, and define yourself before your opponent defines you. Almost all of the terminology we take for granted our culture has redefined, to the point the emerging generations are ignorant of what we're talking about. They have become living, breathing examples of the Hegelian dialectic, which is when the thesis, the argument, and its antithesis, counter-argument, end up merging into a synthesis, the narrative, and they become virtually indistinguishable from one another. I see this when dealing with the liberal media, whom I've had a lot of interaction with the past couple of years as someone interviewed on presidential politics frequently. Older liberal reporters are Watergate-era ideologues, naturally suspicious of conservatives and Republicans. However, when I've dealt with younger members of the liberal media, I see a completely different level of bias. While their elders have rejected what conservatives believe, the next generation is totally ignorant of it. They have been so indoctrinated into a secular progressive worldview that the idea of someone like me, who can articulate a cogent thought and still believe Jesus Christ physically rose from the dead, just doesn't compute. I am a foreign concept to them. They talk to me inquisitively, almost like they're saying, wow, these things do exist, and we get to observe one of them in its natural habitat. Let me provide three examples. Older liberal media use the term pro-choice to describe those in favor of child killing. Younger liberal media now uses the term reproductive freedom. Older liberal media use the terms gay marriage or same-sex marriage to describe two people of the same gender committing to a monogamous relationship and having it recognized by the state with the same prominence as marriage. Younger liberal media now uses the term marriage equality. Older liberal media used phrases like making the wealthy pay their fair share to play class warfare. Younger liberal media now goes straight up socialist with the term income equality. Younger liberal media uses phrases that leave no room for discussion, let alone debate. They are operating under the assumption that those questions have been settled, so considering other points of view is unnecessary since there aren't any that are valid anyway. I've had many of them flat out tell me I forfeit my right to free speech and religious liberty if I disagree with redefining marriage, since I'm now a bigot and bigots don't have rights. This, of course, is extremist language coming from those who call us extremists. Since conservatives have spent a generation retreating from the arena of ideas to form holy huddles in our own little enclaves of the already initiated, we have forsaken an entire generation to be indoctrinated by anti-American, anti-Christian leftists who clearly know what they're doing. The emerging generation hasn't rejected the American way because it hasn't even considered it. We've stopped competing in the arena of ideas, so we've left them with no choice but to accept the synthesized narrative, or the Hegelian dialectic, that they have been sold in government schools. Thus, they believe the Constitution calls for the separation of church and state, there is no such thing as transcendent truth, and moral absolutes don't exist. So if we're going to engage this emerging generation, we're going to have to define our terms and ourselves clearly and explicitly. If there's one of our tactics that needs a complete overhaul, it is this one. We're still speaking Betamax VHS, and the culture, especially the emerging generation, is speaking Blu-ray. One of the best books on this subject I've ever read is Beyond Belief to Conviction by Josh McDowell. McDowell talks about how terms that used to have a consensus definition in past generations now mean totally different things. The best example is the term tolerance. Tolerance used to mean, hey, I may not agree with you and what you're doing or what you believe, but as long as you're not doing anything illegal and your business stays your business, then it's no business of mine. But now tolerance means you must accept, validate, and then participate in everything I am doing that is not illegal, and not only must it be your business, but your children's business as well. That's just one example of how we have lost the language here. In this media-driven age of mass communication and social networking, he who controls the language has control. Even our attempts to combat this have been ineffective. For instance, in a misguided attempt to appear culturally relevant and sensitive, the past generation of conservative leaders created their own code words like traditional values to avoid saying Judeo-Christian or biblical. In other words, they redefined their terms to appease their enemies. Ironically, these code words are actually more offensive than the real words. When I tell someone I am taking this stand because I am a Christian, they may not agree, but since they're usually not a Christian, they at least understand that disagreement is coming from my bitter clinging to my guns and my religion. However, if I tell them I'm taking this stand because I'm for traditional values, I just told them they have no values or that their values are out of the mainstream when the mainstream is currently preaching their values. Therefore, my attempt to soften the blow just created more enmity instead. Good luck finding common ground or bringing them over to your side from there. What I have found when interacting with those who don't share my worldview is the exact opposite is true. The more I clearly define what I believe and why I believe it, the more credibility I develop with them, and the more willing they are to engage me in the arena of ideas, provided I do one thing. I must apply my standard consistently. Let me repeat that for emphasis. We must apply our standard consistently. Translation: the Bible and the Constitution must be equally applied to Democrats and Republicans. Since we are no longer a silent majority in this country, we cannot just continue to subjectively admonish Democrats and provide Republicans political exoneration for their violation of the laws of nature and nature's God and expect to get our way on Election Day. In this next phase of the culture war, we're going to need converts to our side. And in this day and age, no one wants to sign up with a bunch of hypocrites. If we want the culture at large to accept our truth claims, then we must have integrity in applying them. I define integrity as a consistency between right belief and right behavior, or long obedience in the right direction. Without integrity, there is no trust. Without trust, there is no relationship. Without relationship, there is no hope of getting others to see things your way. As the old saying goes, no one cares what you know until they know how much you care. The American people don't believe that we really believe these principles like limited government and Judeo-Christian morality that we're clamoring for all the time because they see our unwillingness to hold Republicans to the same standard as Democrats. They think all we care about is beating Democrats and not what's best for the country. Sadly, too many conservative groups have fed this stereotype. We have been defined as hypocrites, and every time we do something like spend 3 years scourging the evils of Obamacare, only to turn right around and anoint the architect of its predecessor Romneycare our presidential nominee, we end up playing right along with their narrative. Another recent hypocrisy perfectly illustrates my point. In 2012, the Republican chairman of the Armed Services Committee said allowing homosexuals to openly serve in the U.S. military was a settled issue, and Republicans would not seek to repeal it. This after years of Republicans fighting the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which is one of the few culture war issues John McCain has actually been willing to stand for. But now a Republican majority in the U.S. Congress won't seek to reassert the policy it fought against being repealed and hammered Democrats for. Then what was the point in the first place? Not to mention, if a Democrat chairman of the Armed Services Committee had said that every pro-family group in the country would have flooded my email inbox with fundraising calls to, quote, fight the liberals trying to impose their Hollywood values on the rest of us. We may view ourselves as conservatives, constitutionalists, and/or Christians, but the reality is we have allowed our enemy to define us as hypocrites, which is our own fault. Attacks are only damaging when they're true. Someone can accuse me of beating my wife all they want, but as long as she comes out and says it's not true, it says more about them than it does me. Therefore, the damages that come from being attacked are always self-inflicted, either because you are who they say you are, or you fail to respond accordingly or with a tin ear. All other attacks are opportunities, with your attackers providing you with the means, motive, and opportunity to define yourself without sounding like you're self-righteous or a self-promoter. We are also allowing our enemies to define the argument. That's a big one. Why do pro-life groups just accept being labeled anti-abortion? Why do pro-family groups accept being labeled anti-same-sex marriage? When did illegal aliens become undocumented immigrants? How come conservatives allow these characterizations to go unchallenged when they're being interviewed or communicating via their own platforms? Why do conservatives accept Orwellian, politically correct doublespeak like pro-choice or sexual orientation and then expect to actually win the argument after the other side has already framed it? After all, the right to life is the default position of the Declaration of Independence, which is the organic law of these United States. So shouldn't those who oppose that right be described as anti-life or pro-death? Marriage as the union between one man and one woman is among the oldest traditions in the 5,000 plus years of recorded human history. So shouldn't those who seek to undo it be described as anti-marriage? One of the reasons we conservatives get a bad rap for only being defined by what we're against is because, well, we allow ourselves to be only defined by what we're against. We must stop allowing the left to define us in the argument if we actually want to win the argument. A pretty good rule of thumb is if this is how your enemy wants to be defined or wants to define you, you don't want to use that definition. For example, two terms we should never use. That's right, never use, are abortion and sexual orientation. Abortion sounds indifferent to what is actually taking place, which is intentional. When your kid is getting his tonsils out, the doctor calls it a tonsillectomy. So how come when a mother is having her child removed, it's not called a pediaectomy? Probably because there'd be a lot less of them if it had always been defined by what it actually is: child killing. Whenever pro-lifers are using a public platform to defend the God-given, inalienable right to life, we need to define child killing as child killing. Would you rather be pro-choice or pro-child killing? Some of you reading this now will balk immediately at what I just wrote, worried about such coarse language coming across as offensive. If you're one of those people, then start over at the beginning of this book and reread. If after rereading it you still don't get it, then do the rest of us a favor. Get out of politics because you're not cut out for it. Doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means you're not cut out for warfare and you're only getting in the way of victory. I guess I'm kind of strange because I'm more worried about offending the God our politicians swear their oath of office to, and he hates the shedding of innocent blood, than I am offending the ones shedding that innocent blood. I guess I'm more worried about saving babies than I'm worried about upsetting those killing them. We would not consider calling a serial killer pro-choice for choosing to take the lives of innocent people. So why would we refer to those who have assented to the slaughter of at least 50 million American citizens in such antiseptic terms? It's quite simple, really. If you want to raise awareness among the American people in order to move them to stop child killing, then you should probably define it as, get this, child killing. It's no wonder abortion ranks low among the issue priorities for many Americans because it sounds indifferent and impersonal. However, many of those same Americans, regardless of belief system, would instinctively act right away if someone was threatening innocent children in their neighborhood. Calling child killing what it is goes a long way towards creating a similar sense of urgency. Likewise, there's no such thing as sexual orientation. This term implies the natural gender each of us is born with is somehow insufficient in determining our identity, when nothing could be further from the truth. To agree to that premise would require making the case God makes mistakes. I don't put windshield wiper fluid in my gas tank and then expect the car to run properly because it has a different fuel orientation. The intelligent designer of the car intended for the parts he designed to work together for a reason, and the car doesn't work properly unless we use it as its designer intended. Similarly, males and females created in the image of God each have parts the other doesn't have. Those parts fit together, and it just so happens the primary purpose they fit together is for procreation. Amazing, isn't it? Almost like there's a plan or something. If we don't get a grip on the language here, the next stop will be the twilight zone. Here's what happens when a culture reaches the twilight zone. An era defined by bad ideas whose time has come, this one ranks right up, or should I say, down there. As of November 2013, parents in Germany will now be given a third option for defining their child's gender on his or her birth certificate. No, I didn't just make that up. Yes, you heard that right. But There aren't three genders, you say. There are only boys and girls, you claim. Well, that's because you still live in the dark ages with the rest of history's losers, bitterly clinging to your guns and your Bibles. See, you're still holding on to those antiquated traditions of Western civilization, the very moral value system that made liberty and prosperity possible. As a progressive bureaucrat in Oregon recently said, you need to be rehabilitated. Once rehabilitated, you will come to learn what all the progressives currently saving Western civilization have come to learn, although we have no idea where or how they learned it. And that idea is that a child's gender could be, quote, indeterminate, as the German government now asserts. Facebook offers you over 50 different ways to identify your gender. True, for eons now, humankind of all races, ethnicities, and belief systems simply looked between a newborn's legs to determine what gender he or she was and then raised it accordingly. But that is so passé. Just because we've been doing it that way for 5,000 years doesn't mean we should keep on denying such randomly evolved primates' quests for self-actualization. After all, who are we to judge? How can I possibly impose my definition of penis, vagina, male or female, on another human being? If there is no standard we're all ultimately accountable to, then there really is no standard at all, and everyone does what he or she sees fit. This chaos is what progressives describe as freedom. Granted, Western civilization has traditionally defined freedom to mean freedom from our sinful nature, to do what's right without government redefining right from wrong to suit its own status desires, and then to profit off of doing so. Thus we can pass on a better way of life to our gender-specific offspring than we had. But why hold on to cherished traditions that build the most successful human civilizations this side of Eden when we instead can trade it all in for a culture so indeterminate we don't even know what gender we are? If only we could get the progressive status to throw in $17 trillion in debt as well to sweeten the deal. I mean, wow, who would make that trade in a heartbeat? Can you shout Allah Akbar? I hope so, because it looks like you'll need to sooner rather than later. Maybe you don't think this is your problem. Maybe you think whatever doesn't impact your wallet is none of your concern. Except the very people peddling this dead sprint towards Gomorrah are the same people that steal from you in the name of compassion. So either way, you will be made to care. But why stop at the child's birth? We shouldn't impose a gender on a child ever. What blessed diversity that would be. Imagine gender becoming like an Almond Joy candy bar commercial from back in the day. Sometimes you feel like a nut. Sometimes you don't. But let's not overreact with one of those dreaded slippery slope arguments. I mean, it's not like we'll have kids in schools determining what bathrooms to use based on what gender they feel they are on a given day or anything. Oh, wait. They already are doing that as we speak. In the People's Republic of California, of course. If you want to save marriage and stop your children from being indoctrinated into believing that which God says is wrong is suddenly right, then don't accept the terminology of those doing that which you oppose. Previous generations that built this country didn't refer to someone's sexual orientation. They referred to someone behaving immorally, and so should we. Please note, the previous generations that built the country didn't have the systemic moral problems we currently have. So we would be wise to follow in their footsteps. Oh, and please stop using terms like same-sex marriage, gay marriage, or traditional marriage. There is only marriage. What's next? Referring to couples shacking up as pre-marriage? Everyone already knows what a marriage is, so accepting the premise that it can't be redefined or clarified by either side is allowing our enemies to define us. Since we hold the moral high ground, we should be defining them. Branding is so important in our culture. You may prefer Pepsi, but when you go to a movie or out to eat, your default is to ask for a Coke. Mind share always equals market share. The power of the brand becomes embedded in the subconscious of our fellow Americans. And if that branding is done by the American left, we are doing ourselves irreparable harm in the long run by reinforcing it. Instead of reinforcing the left's branding, we need to introduce our own.
And that was Chapter 8 of Rules for Patriots, How Conservatives Can Win Again by Steve Deese. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that determinism is optional.
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.